Hi everybody. I'm in here today to work on another desktop computer. Now I know, oh shucks, it's been 8-9 months or something since I did my last one, where I built one for video processing and content creation, and I made a powerful one. Well, I've got another one here, another desktop, and this one's a little more mundane. And actually, once upon a time, it was my content creator machine. But as technology left it behind, we kept it running. I kept it running. My wife uses it a lot. And it's been running for, what, close to 15 years now. And I just decided it was time to update. I know that Windows 10, its end of life is later this year, and 11 is coming. I'll keep this one running on 10 for now, but it just seemed like it was a good time to upgrade. Well, a couple things. One is I'm going to build this. It's a conversion from the old to the new, and I'll show you here what I've got and what I'm going to use. And I'm going to explain a little bit. A lot of folks don't use desktops anymore, right? And everybody gets a phone or a tablet, and they do their stuff on that. And a little bit philosophy-wise, I keep a couple of desktops going, and they basically operate like file servers. I mean, they're desktops, you use them, but I store information on the hard drives. I insist that my main hard drives are a mirrored version of RAID, so that you write the same data to both hard drives. And then periodically you back it up, because even though you're sending things to two different hard drives, if the motherboard dies, you could corrupt both drives. So you still want to back up from time to time, but on a daily basis, it keeps things going. In the age of cloud systems, sometimes you might say, well, why do you do that, right? I have a cloud account, I've got a Dropbox account, and I use it for special things, but I've just never been comfortable with sending all my personal private data and papers and financials and all of that out to cloud accounts. If you watch in the news, there are many data breaches. There are data breaches almost all the time, and so certain things I'd rather keep on my own machine rather than sending them up. So I usually run these. I have like a Microsoft account, but I don't store anything out on OneDrive. Everything stays on my machines, and I back them up to external hard drives and keep off-board storage and sometimes off-property storage, and run that way more as a security comfort thing to me. So my old machine here had two hard drives, two 1 terabytes, mirroring each other. And I'll just say why I did that in the beginning was, when I built this machine with its original motherboard 20 years ago, I built it and I spent days loading all the software and programs that I had had on a previous computer and getting it all up and running. It was working great. And I shut it down, I went away for the weekend, and I came back and fired it back up and wouldn't boot. The hard drive had died. Brand new hard drive. It had less than a week on it, and it wouldn't run. Now, there's a fix to some of that. There's some tricks that you can use, and the trick I used was, before I gave up on everything and started over, was I took that drive out and I put it in another computer. I didn't install it in the computer, I laid it on top of the hard drive in another computer, and just let it sit there for 24 hours to warm up, just to change the temperature of the drive to close to operating temperature. And then I plugged it back into this one, and boy, she lit off, and I was able to get my data recovered, and then got a fresh drive, put the backup in, sent that one out for under warranty, and got it replaced. But it was kind of a lesson, right? You can't trust any one of these devices. And the new solid state hard drives, I've had some fun with those where they just suddenly die, and they're less forgiving in getting data back. Typically when they die, it's really, really hard to recover. So in my new one, I'm going to use these NVMe drives, which are solid state, and I'm going to run a pair of them and mirror them with RAID, which makes my build a little tougher to do. The build will be fine. It'll be getting all my stuff transferred over from my old mechanical hard drive into the new one. But I'll show later on how to do that. So what's up anyway? So what do I have? I have my old Antec case. This case is 20 years old. And I like it because it has multiple drive bays. I can put 4 hard drives of the old style in it. You can't see it here on the back side, but there's a door, and it has, I had 2 optical drives in it that now I'm going to drop down to 1. I've got a SD card reader, a multi-format a digital card reader in the front. So what I've done so far is I've taken the old motherboard out, and just for reference, it was one of these gigabyte 880 GAs, and it was capable. What I had for a processor was an AMD, what do they call it, Thuban, an X6. So this computer wasn't bad. It was fairly powerful for its day, really. I was running it overclocked. It was a good machine, but all things must come to an end. I also it was running XP and Windows 10 in a dual boot, and I've been working now to get the XP stuff separated. Both of them are still on the drive, but I've been copying data and programs and things, and trying to figure out what I can get rid of, because the old motherboard had things like a fax modem on it, and well, I'm just not going to be able to use the fax modem anymore, and heck, I hardly ever do. So some of those things are going to go away in the new board. So anyway, I started clearing it out and got the old motherboard out, got the cables all out, getting things here organized. Then I got down to a surprise, and that is I have this very nice Antec power supply. It's a 650, and I said, ooh, great. This power supply will run the new board, piece of cake. Well, I was comparing connectors, and when you get down to all the connectors, the newer motherboard, 2 CPU connectors instead of 1. So the old board had an 8-pin CPU connector. The new board has an 8-pin and a 4-pin, and they want power to both. And while there's supposedly some adapters that you can use, and I've even seen people suggesting you don't need to plug in the other 4-pin unless you're really gaming. I'm sorry, I'm just going to do things right and not kind of shortcut it. So this afternoon, as I got this all out and vacuumed out because there were dust bunnies in through it, and it was kind of a mess. Now, in fairness, you know, this Antec, I'm just going to talk about durability of machines for a minute. The motherboard in here, this gigabyte motherboard, is 15 years old. This is a 2013, so it's 12 years old and still running like a champ. So maybe it's good that I'm going ahead and replacing it anyway. And we used to turn this machine off and on, but as I used it more and more for a home network, more for being able to get to files 24 hours a day, or logging in, I could hook up with my laptop and pick up files off this machine in the house. So this has been a 24/7 machine for at least the last 10 years or so. It just runs all day and all night, and I mean it idles when you're not using it, so it's a little bit of a waste of energy in sorts. But if I need to get to data, I don't have to go around and boot it up and get it all going again. It's all set. I gotta say, that gigabyte board's got 15 years on it without missing a beat, and that Antec power supply, likewise, is 12 years without missing a beat, and that's pretty great. So anyway, so what am I doing? I'm taking out the old equipment. When I found this was in trouble, I started hunting, and there aren't a lot of computer stores out there, but I have a micro center, like 25 miles away across town, and they had one of these Seasonics. And if you remember my last video for the content creation machine, this is what I used. Now this is an 850. It's really overkill for the machine. I don't need an 850 for what I'm going to do. But that's what they had on the shelf. I like Seasonic as a brand. And it's a modular. It's got a 10-year warranty on it. You know, if you're going to run a machine like my last one, 15 years, you might as well go ahead and get good parts in it that are going to run for a while. I went through a lot of study when I built my content creator machine 9 months ago, and so I'm using a lot of the same parts because I know that they work together and that machine's running like a champ. So I went back and bought, this is the a Gigabyte B650. This is called an Elite AX V2. My other one didn't have a V number on it. It was basically version 1. This is version 2. As far as I can tell, the specs are very, very close. And so I picked up the newer model. I probably won't use the wireless because I've got a good in-home Ethernet network, but I've got it if I need it. It's an AM5 board, which is the latest one for AMD's processors. I didn't go all out. The last one, I bought the AMD, their Ryzen 9, and bought kind of one of their high-end consumer processors. This one is a Ryzen 7, and it's the 7700 model. It's not a 7700X. I could always overclock it or push it probably to the same level, but again, for the way this machine is going to operate, I could have probably bought a Ryzen 5, and I've got another machine in it that's got a Ryzen 5 in it that performs very nicely. I bought the non-X model because it's a 65 watt max rating, and if you bought the X, it's like 105 watt. And so if you buy this one with a little bit lower power, it comes with a factory cooler in it with a fan. You know, the fan and cooler is in the box. If you buy an X, then you got to go out and buy an aftermarket cooler. Nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know, more dollars, $50 or $100 more for a good aftermarket cooler. And again, for how we're using this machine, I'd rather run the little bit lower clocked processor. And, you know, compared to the old AMD we were running as 15 years old, this thing's going to be about, I don't know, I didn't look at the numbers, but, you know, it's probably 20 or 30 times faster, even call it the slow version. And if I ever choose to, I could overclock it. I could get a bigger cooler. Sky's the limit, we could go. Again, NVMe drives. I'm using the solid state drives that mount on the motherboard. I bought a pair of them because I'm going to do the RAID, and now that'll be some fun when I set up, and I'll probably put that in a separate video because it'll get too long, of how I, you know, once this gets going, how do I bring it up online and load data on these. I went back to G-Skill for the Trident memory, and these are their Z5 Neo RGBs. And for my content creator machine, I bought 64 gig. I went big because I wanted a lot. I've also learned that it's expensive to buy memory and then 2 years or 3 years later throw it away. My budget's permitting a little more, so I didn't go 64, but I went 32. So this is a pair of 16s that makes 32 gig. And then the last guy down here, this is a USB panel. Because this case is 20 years old, it has front USB ports, but they're all 2.0s. There isn't any USB 3. So I'm taking out one of the optical drives. I'll leave one behind, leave a burner behind in here. But I'll have an open bay. So this guy is USB 2s, USB 3s, and a USB-C, all of which have headers on this motherboard. So So that'll give us some extra ports on the front side of the machine, some high-speed ports, that when this is installed, I've got a computer desk, and once this is in the desk, you know, all these ports are in the back are hard to reach, I'll just say. But you've seen me put a motherboard in before. I'm probably not going to give you the full play-by-play. I got the old one out. I'm going to start by screwing the motherboard in and build this guy up. Actually, I'll start with the power supply, get that in the case before I try to get the motherboard in. Then the motherboard goes in, then I'll populate it up with all the parts. And this one will be a lot easier build than my content creator, because that one I did, you know, water-cooled radiator. Now before I bolt this in, Seasonic provides a little connector, and they want you to plug in the motherboard cable and then put this connector in, hook it to the motherboard cable. With that jumper, I'm supposed to be able to turn this on, and with the fan switch in the correct position, and make sure the fan runs and that the thing powers up. There it goes. For a minute I was wondering, I guess I had the fan in the wrong, switch in the wrong spot. But it is powered up and running. Now I can go bolt it in the case. And they have what they call a hybrid mode on here, where the fan only runs, if you turn that on, like that, the fan only runs when you're like above 30% of load or something to that effect. And then this is a gold power supply. It's an 80% gold, which means it hits, their ratings are kind of odd. I mean, it's standard ratings, it's not Seasonic, but it means at half power it hits like 90% by being a gold, which is, that's pretty darn good. My habit in the past has been to bolt the board into the case and then install the processor and the memory and the cooler. In some ways that was because sometimes getting the coolers in, sometimes installing the motherboard assembled was difficult. I think I'm going to give it a try per the instructions, and we'll install the processor and the cooler and memory and hard drives before I place it in the case. Then I'll put it in the case and start connecting up cables. It was a good thing that I went out and bought a new power supply, because my wrist straps, the insulation on the wires was going bad and it was starting to flake off, and I had bare wire, which, I mean, it was still working, but didn't seem right. So I bought myself a couple of fresh ones. And then, as usual, you can't go to Radio Shack and buy it because it doesn't exist anymore. But this is my anti-static mat that's plugged into a ground, so that I'm working on an anti-static surface. So let's see if we can get the processor to install here. Put that lid up. There's an arrow up here on the corner of the processor, and there's an arrow in the base down here, and a couple of notches that are off center, so there's only one way that it can really go in. On this one, you don't have pins, all you have is a lot of pads, and it just presses down onto the pads. So we set it like that, and the instructions say there's a plastic cover on here. They tell you not to worry about the plastic cover yet, that it will come off when you push things down like that, and it did. It popped off. So now that's sitting down. Just double check it. Yep, looks like it's sitting down well. And so then we'll push the lever. We're good, I guess, given that the fan headers are up here. They've got compound and applied to the bottom. It's a nice cooler. Look at that. That's a really nice cooler. Should have a lot of capacity. There it goes. Got to hook it on the bracket there. And I try not to smear the grease up too much, so you kind of want to get it on one time. Hook it in place, and then this one's got one lever to center down, And then the fan, CPU fan, is right there. And then it does come with two cables. There are apparently LED lights in there. Frankly, I'm never going to see those, so I'm not going to worry about turning the lights on right now. Who knows, maybe I'll come back later. And as I said, this is Trident Z5 Neo G-Skill, and it's got what they call the AMD Expo. It's got an overclocking profile built into it. Now the instructions tell you that they want the modules to be installed in A2 and B2 first. If you have two modules, they should go in A2 and B2. So I've got those prepared. And again, there should only be one way to go together because there's a notch in the middle. Let me press that down. The nice thing about doing it out here instead of in the case is that you do have a better, you got a flatter surface, so that you do put less flex in the board doing it this way. So there's A2 snapped in. Let's go ahead and do B2 snapped in. And these will have pretty lights too. It's a shame because nobody will see the pretty lights because I don't have a glass case. But so now I'm going to do the so-called hard drives. And I know the fact that I'm going to run the two of them in RAID will slow things down a little, but you know, these drives are so much faster than the mechanical ones that. So I'm going to populate is the main one here and a secondary slot here. It's supposed to just slide in, snap into there. And then they got these easy latch clips on. You just push it down and it clips in. Slide that down. I always kind of hate doing that before I know that the drives are working. So, because you probably only get one shot at the thermal tape, but I'm going to assume they work. We're going to set them up, and if I have to go get more thermal tape, I'll get more thermal tape. It's nice heat sinks. These are nice boards. They're really, in my opinion, they're premium boards. Now that I've got all that accomplished, now I'm going to set the board into the case and fasten her down and start making connections. See if we can get it in there now that I've done all the things in the other order. And a little bit of fun here getting it around all of the cables and connectors and things. Just want to be gentle so as to not disturb anything on the board. Alright, I'm just going to run all the screws and get her fastened in, and I'll be back. So now I need to get all the connections made. So my system fan, this one, my old board didn't actually have a system fan connector, but this one does. So let's get that one. It's labeled system fan. Let's go ahead and hook that one up. This one is the motherboard connector that I already tested, but I'm going to leave that one for a few minutes. Keep it out of the way while I connect some other thing. Gigabyte gives you a nice little, I don't know what you want to call it, an organizer for the connections. So it looks like this, and it shows you that you take this little guy and you get everything lined up in it. Then it plugs in here on the corner. And I have the instructions from the case originally, which helps me some because you got pluses and minuses, and I wanted to double check and make sure. So I've been clicking them in here, the reset switch, the hard drive switch. Here's one for speaker, and black is ground and red is hot. So power LED, same thing, colored is hot in this ribbon cable, and black is ground. Needs to get clipped into the corner. It's got a blank spot. It can only go in one way, so it It's kind of a nice touch, because you just push that down on the pins and everything's all loaded in. This one is audio, and the audio had a bunch of extra pins, depending on the configuration. And that'll be the audio ports down here on the front. This is USB 4. Okay, that's the card reader. It needs a USB connection to read cards at all. So I'm going to take one of my USB ports down here and plug that guy in there. I've got another 2.0, a 3 point, whatever, 3.1 or 3.2, and then a C as we go. So we got that. I have another USB and a 1394. Now, a 1394 is not going to function because I don't have a 1394 port on the board. That's one of the things I'm going to lose now, but that's alright. This one I think is just the lights on the front of the case. So that one's okay. Alright, so what I've got here is, this is my front panel. It will have two USB 3s, two USB 2s, and the sound and a C in the middle. And it comes with a USB, an audio, and I've got the cables here. And then the cables that are already installed have USB-C and USB 3 connectors on them that will match the motherboard. And given that this one has fresh audio connectors, I may just remove the audio that I installed down here and use the one in this front panel instead. But I'm going to install the front panel and connect it here in a minute. Well, I got the front panel piece installed. I love these cases because there are very little tools involved. I mean, you got to use a couple screws, but the new piece just snapped into the front. All the cables, and the tape is just temporary to keep things kind of out of the way while I'm going. But I've got the USB hooked in and the sound jacks hooked in. I had a little bit more trouble down in this corner is the USB 3.1 or 3.2 or whatever. The cable's pretty heavy. It's I didn't like the way it bent. It was way too tight. So I've gone in. I was going to try to cut it. That didn't work, but I was able to go in and bend the sheet metal of the drive bays in an area that isn't important, and I managed to push it back in, you know, a 1/4 inch or maybe 3/8, and route the cables through the bottom here below where the lowest, underneath what the final drive bay would be. I think that's going to be okay. I just didn't like those cables were really crimped at a right angle, and it just didn't seem right. I got a pair of tin snips and I was going to try to cut this metal, but it's pretty doggone tough. Didn't have the board. I could go in there with a Dremel or something and cut it out, but I ain't doing that with all the electronics in there. So I bent it. I think that'll be enough. I'm going to leave it at that. Now I'm going to put in power supply connectors. I'm going to leave the motherboard one for last over here. I have two that I need to put in that say CPU on them and come from the power supply. And these are the ones that, this is why I had to go buy a new power supply. So we'll plug one in there, and then it comes down here to the bottom. But then there's a 4-pin next to it, and I need to put a second one in there. So there's a second one of these CPUs, and the way they do these is they're 4+4s, so you can pop them apart. They got a little clip on them, so I got them separated. So now I can plug that into the power supply and drop just one of those 4-pin jobbies into the, there it goes. Again, I'm going to have to dress cables when we're done here. I need one of the old school Molex connectors for an old, it's actually the lighting on the front of the case. And I need one for power for SATA drives. I'll plug that one in there. And they have two separate sections in the power supply for PCIe or CPU power. And I'm just going to put one in each, just to spread it out a little more. Going the right way though. And for the optical drive up here, take the other end of this one, and it will go on the back of the hard drive. For some reason, when the data cable is on, the power cable is harder to line up. Maybe the plugs are just that new and they're stiff. So, plug it back. There it goes. Just didn't want to feed the first time, but now it's in. And the Seasonic folks have given me all kinds of nylon wire ties to dress things with. I'm just going to make sure that everything works first, and then I'll come back and tie things down and make it look neat. But I think that's it for right now. I have to put the plates back in the back because I'm not using any expansion cards, including a video card. I don't know that I mentioned this earlier, but one of the reasons I picked this CPU is it has built-in graphics. It has, so I don't have to use a separate video card. And since this machine's not used for gaming, it's more sedate than that. I think it's enough. When I looked up the specs, this processor's video is a little bit slower, but only a little bit, than the old 13-year-old video card that I had in here. The two are pretty comparable. And so I'm going to give it a try. And if I don't like it, I can always pop in, I'll get a new card and pop it in there. But for getting started, we're just going to use the onboard video and go with that. Well, alright, at this point I've made all the connections. That's how you put the motherboard in. That's how you set it up. Now I'm not going to go any further right now. I'll wrap this one up, and then I'll be back with a follow-up when I boot this up, get the data that's on this drive connected over to the solid state drive. And that's a little bit of a challenge, particularly to get the RAID drivers loaded. But I already have software on here. I downloaded all the drivers from Gigabyte's website. I have the drivers for RAID for those two drives, and there's a process by which you run it on the operating system on this drive, and while that's up, you install drivers to those two. And then once that's all done, then you take this drive and I back it up to an external drive, and then restore that backup to here, take this one out, restore the backup over there. And it's an involved process. I won't explain more right now, but if you want to see, come on back later. That's all for now.